Welcome to Australia India Institute Delhi's webinar on unconventional thinking in sustainability. Today's chair and moderator is our director, Tanya Spisbah. Tanya is a renowned and influential expert on Australia-India relations, particularly with respect to health and sustainable development. A career diplomat with the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for more than a decade, Ms. Spisbah served from 2014 to 2017 at the Australian High Commission, New Delhi, specializing in health and technology, diplomacy for inclusive sustainable growth. She notably led the health agenda, resulting in the Australian and Indian Prime Ministers exchanging an MOU for health and medicine and facilitating Prime Minister-level attention for research on e-waste and microfactories, leading to Australia-India collaborations.
I know we've only got one clean hour for this webinar, and I'm really delighted to have the speakers that we have on this webinar today on unconventional thinking in sustainability. Now, as many of you would know who are tuning in, World Environment Day is tomorrow, the 5th of June, and the purpose of today's event is to promote inspirational thinking and provoke the imagination to stimulate a can-do attitude of positivity, wonder, and connection to our planet. Everyone in 2020 this year has been touched by the events of the COVID-19 pandemic. And while there have been many positive benefits for the environment, there's also been devastation caused by the pandemic, and the environmental struggles continue with floods in Bangladesh and West Bengal, bushfires at the very beginning of the year in Australia, and cyclones through the Pacific Islands during the COVID crisis, causing much more difficulty to deal with in times of crisis. So this year, the World Environment Day theme is It's Time for Nature. And it's really time for us to think about giving back to nature and also thinking about the vital services that nature gives to us. I'm therefore completely delighted to have such an esteemed panel with us today. Each one has a unique and different experience in terms of how we interact with nature and brings their insights, wisdom, experience, and innovation to the panel. Today, we have Dr. Sebastian Fastenrath, Research Fellow at Resilient Cities, Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute from the University of Melbourne. Sebastian is at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning, and works alongside the City of Melbourne Chair of Resilient Cities. By generating knowledge and expertise through collaborative research and engagement, he continues to develop urban and regional innovations, resilience and sustainable research and policy making. We also have with us Rahul Khadaliya. Rahul is a systems thinker focused on sustainable practices in the city of Bangalore. He's on a mission to design sustainably and utilises design to develop sustainable solutions. Part of Rahul's Studio ABCD explores sustainability through various mediums of designing targeted social, environmental, cultural and economic aspects. We have also Kalyan Akkipeddi, the founder of Proto Village in Andhra Pradesh. Kalyan designed and is living in Proto Village, which is in a drought-prone area called Tekkaladu, and is one of the second driest and one of the poorest districts in India. Since August 2010, he's been building and leveraging local social leadership to create Proto Village, and it's one of the most joyous places one can visit today with him and his wonderful wife Shobi. We have with us Dr. Tia Kansara, an award-winning entrepreneur, moderator, lecturer and author. She is the founder and director of Kansara Hackney, the first ISO quality-controlled sustainable lifestyle consultancy in the UK. Her recent work involves providing city governments with her concept of Replenish, a per capita assessment of ecosystem services, and publishing her book Replenish at 2050 City. Finally, we have Veena Sahajwalla, the inaugural director of the Circular Economy Innovation Network by the New South Wales Government, and also founder of the Z-Smart Centre at UNSW. Professor Veena Sahajwalla is an internationally recognised materials scientist, engineer and inventor, revolutionising recycling science. She is renowned for pioneering the high temperature transformation of waste in the production of a new generation of green materials. In 2018, Veena launched the world's first e-waste microfactory And through that through that technology, she designed a pair of Gandhi glasses, which was in fact the official gift given by then Prime Minister Turnbull of Australia to Prime Minister Modi. So welcome everyone of our esteemed panel, and welcome audience. First of all, I would like to start with Kalyan. Kalyan has moved from his founding of a zero carbon village and is now thinking through ways in which one can do climate friendly yet sustainable positive changes in rural settings. He's now concerned with the design of a rural economic zone to bring social cohesion and ecological sustainability. Kalyan, could you please tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Thanks, Tanya. The question that primarily prompted me into this journey was a simple one. How, with all the intelligence that we are credited with, how could we allow poverty to exist in a world of plenty? And what if we co-created a world in which poverty simply cannot exist? How would that world look and feel? And that quest took me on a 2.5 year long deep learning journey across rural India. And I was privileged to witness communities all along the spectrum, right from the most vulnerable to the most resilient. And I was drawn and I was inspired to kind of focus my energies on creating resilience rather than eradicating poverty. I found that idea a lot more empowering, inspiring, and liberating. And it's saying that, okay, my internet connection is unstable, but I'll just continue on. In case it goes, I'll mute it. So the journey led me to understand resilience as a condition in which a community practices harmonious traditions of interdependence. It employs ecologically sustainable means and blends native knowledge systems with contemporary appropriate technology to achieve self-reliance in 9 basic needs: food and water security, shelter, clothing, healthcare, energy, connectivity, trade, education, and disaster management. So after apprenticing for almost 4 years with one of the poorest farmers in a village in the second driest and one of the most drought-prone and a district called Anantapur in the south of India, in a state called Andhra Pradesh, I founded a proto-village. To the villagers, for the villagers. And when I listed down all the 9 basic needs, while most of them are commonplace, what we thought of was education and trade are going to be the points of leverage. In the sense that if we are able to design them right, we'd be addressing ways in which we can transform the bigger system. So the design question then was, how do we design education and economy as tools in such a way that they cause social cohesion and environmental sustainability? So in the last 4 years, apart from becoming self-reliant with respect to all of these 9 basic needs in Proto-Village, we've also worked on systems, redesigning the systems for our trade and education. Due to the paucity of time, I'm going to focus exclusively on our system for economy. We call it the Rural Economic Zone, that in local language translates to Grameen Arthika Mandali, whose abbreviation is Gramam, which in most Indian languages means a village. So the goal of Rural Economic Zone is, the goals are social cohesion and ecological sustainability, with income being just a consequence. And it's based on 3 simple design conditions. The first one is, every enterprise that is set up in the rural economic zone has to be ecologically friendly, ecologically sustainable, something that nurtures the soil. And the second is that it should be possible with like 60 to 80 villages. What is consistent skilling, building and economy, find ethical practices along the supply chain, and the third.
I think it'll be better if Kalyan switches off his video.
I think Kalyan, we're losing you. Are you able to turn off your video maybe? Turn off your video and then try speaking.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Kalyan.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you now.
Yeah. So as I was saying, the first group of activities are the home level activities, which are basically activities that can be done with little to no investment right at the homes of the villagers. The second category is the village level activities that need small investments and group strength and collaboration to accomplish. And the third is the nodal level. These are activities that require slightly higher investment and a little bit of technology, which can still be locally fabricated, but it's slightly more complex and needing precision. So with these conditions, we invited the villagers to come up with enterprise ideas. And right now, I'm happy to tell you that we're working on enterprises in 3 different categories. One is nutritious food, all made from local produce. Second is home care. And the third is personal care, which includes, the cosmetics, the whole range of it. It includes about 10 enterprises collectively. The scale, as how do we scale this out? We were never big fans of scaling up Proto Village or any of these enterprises. We wanted the design itself to self-scale, in other words, scale out. And all of these enterprises are micro-prototyped at Proto Village by the members of Proto Village, who are all villagers. And each successful enterprise, which finds its market viability and all of that, the members, they train the local village cost, and that they should train another group in a different village and not another group in the same village. So that ensures that there is occupational diversity in each village.
Kalyan, we've lost you again. Do you want to try turning off your video?
Is out about 80 villages around. Hello? Sorry, Tanya?
No, we've got you now. That's fine. We lost you for a moment.
Okay. So the goal is to kind of work towards scaling this out to about 80 villages around Proto, and to engage with about 8,000 women by 2024. So as long as we stick to these fundamental principles and have income as just a consequence, the goal cohesion, sustainability, and if the scale plan works, I think I will be spreading resilience across without actually talking about it. Well,
that's brilliant.
That's
thank you so much, Kalyan. I'm so sorry that it cut out a little bit, but generally we understood the brilliance of your wisdom and redesigning a system on trade and education, and particularly bringing a trade model to a village level that fits within that local level and meets the needs of the people. I was touched also by the fact that the areas of industry themselves are relevant to some of your 9 principles, including the nutritious homegrown food, which means you're still creating things in a zero carbon way, but then having that add-on effect by providing, you know, micronutrients to people who might not always have access to this, home care and personal care as well. And particularly your model about, in a way, the Prime Minister has caught up with you and announced a self-reliant India, which I'm sure is based on your principles. But the idea of train the trainer, but by bringing those diverse skills to different villages so that they're also able to meet their needs with self-reliance in a sustainable way. And I will just say that I loved the soap when I tried it at Personal Village as well. So thank you very much. Dr. Sebastian Fastenrath, I thought you would be an excellent speaker to go next. Kalyan has given us a very interesting model about the rural environment, and you as an expert of the urban environment, it would be fascinating to hear from you about green buildings and the creative way in which you work with numerous stakeholders to achieve change. So Sebastian, please offer your thoughts.
Yeah, congrats, Kalyan. First of all, it's really impressive work and it resonates, I think, also with my work, and even though it's in a bigger scale in cities and regions. I might come back to you after my talk. Yeah, first of all, thank you, Tanya, for the kind introduction, and I'm really pleased to be part of this panel. And it's kind of a great opportunity to reconnect to New Delhi. As I told you yesterday, I spent a couple of months in Delhi pretty much 10 years ago as part of a research stay of my master's thesis at the University of Cologne in Germany. So really happy to be kind of virtually there in Delhi. Yeah, this panel really resonates with my work around urban, regional sustainable development, resilience, and place-based innovation. And I think we could also hear that in this talk, that it's really about place-based development and innovation. I think that's really important. So my main focus in my research lies really in understanding innovative sustainability projects, which often entail 2 aspects, and we could hear that already. First, there's this kind of new practices, new technologies that are introduced or adapted. And second, and I think that's equally important, or maybe more important, is to understand the social component. So the question about who is actually involved, who is driving this kind of projects, and who is cooperating with each other. Yeah, why cities? Cities, yeah, are seen as the key arenas and seabeds for transformational change and sustainability. Recently, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, SDG 11, which is just on cities, states that to tackle the increasingly tangible impact of climate change, growing socioeconomic inequalities, and other environmental degradation problems, to tackle those problems, we need to better plan. We need better urban planning in contexts such as housing, mobility, energy, or health. So the question is, and that's a bit where I am at the moment with my research, is how can cities actually better plan and build capacity for change towards more sustainable futures? And I think Kalyan gave a really good example how to do better planning because it's people-centered, based on the villager's view. And that's a bit what I want to talk about. So there's certainly no single answer to that, and I like that know that we probably don't have to scale up everything. We are probably good in develop place-based development. But I think what's important is to tackle this really complex and wicked problems is that we need to work together. These are really complex issues that really need work together. We need platforms for exchange that brings together experts from different areas, from different sectors, because these problems are they're connected: environmental problems, social issues, economic aspects. And I learned that through my work during the last almost 10 years that these challenges, we can just work on them together. with different stakeholders from the society, from communities, research, the private sector, and the public sector. So we really need this boundary platforms and platforms for exchange. To illustrate that a little bit, I have two examples from my research. One is in Germany. You might have heard of that example, the city of Freiburg, which is in the southwest of Germany. And it is kind of the, hope you can see that, just case study of my PhD. Freiburg is a city, medium density, population of 200,000. But Freiburg has this image as a really, as an eco-forerunner city that started, especially in the 1990s. It's located in the border area to Switzerland and in France, so in the southwest corner of Germany. But the question I had was really to understand why developed Freiburg this kind of green image, and what were the reasons for that? And that's also really about the people. My focus on research was on green building transitions, and there are a couple of really interesting examples of demonstration projects in Freiburg. And I was really looking into this development pathway of change. Why did these processes went on in Freiburg? And the examples goes actually to, and that's probably the most well-known example in Freiburg, is the Vauban area. And the so-called solar settlement in Vauban, which is they claim themselves it's the first plus energy neighborhood in the world. You can see that here on the picture. So they generate the energy through photovoltaic panels on each house. So calculated over the years, they produce more energy than they actually use in the area. But my question, how did that actually happen, was if you go back to the 1970s, there were really innovative architects, engineers who developed demonstration projects. There were two research institutes really looking into new materials, solar building design principles, and stuff like that. And what happened then in the 80s, that also policymakers were really interested in energy efficiency and environmental politics, that they introduced a building standard in Freiburg, and that was one of the earliest city-owned building standards in Germany at that time. So what I figured out, that it was kind of a bottom-up movement in Freiburg, really interested people, architects, and societal drivers, but at some point the local policymakers took up these ideas and helped, so to say, this energy scene and this environmental scene to develop new standards. So a bit my conclusion of that research was that the success factors were that there's this kind of open-ended thinking, learning process over decades from the 70s, a really open mind for experimentation and innovation, and continuity of leadership. I think that's really important. That's what we are missing in Australia a lot. Talking about Australia, that's my second example that I want to talk about. That's research I've been working on the last 2 years with my work with Resilient Album, which is embedded in the 100 Resilient Cities network, which was initiated by the Rockefeller Foundation. And this project, which is called Living Melbourne, the idea is to support green infrastructure and extend greening over the whole city. And that is also really about building a platform of exchange, because the problem in the larger Australian cities is there's a really fragmented policy structure with a lot of councils, and this project actually brought together all the 32 councils in Melbourne, brought together other stakeholders from academia, from NGO, from community. So that's another really good example. There's a report published last year, and now it's going into the implementation phase. So there are two examples out of my research over the last couple of years. This is a document And yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer a couple of questions later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. That's great, and it's good to get a sense of the urban side as well. I'm sorry, I think my audio might be playing up. Anyway, I hope it's all right. But to get the sense that even in an urban setting, that bottom-up movement is essential for sustainability, as is a sense of continuity of leadership. And in some ways, where we have more access to technology and in some ways more resources, the difficulty is also the empowerment of people. So, you know, I think it's really interesting to contrast these options of rural versus urban. Now I would like to turn to Tia Kansara. Tia, it's quite extraordinary at the moment. We were trying to edge our way towards an environmentally friendly world with the Paris Accord. Coronavirus in some ways has improved the environment against all positive intention to kind of improve the environment, but more because we shut down cities and therefore shut down the biggest emitters of pollution. However, in this move back to rebuild the economy or reopen the economy, many leaders around the world are talking about stimulus packages and jobs and more jobs. But unfortunately, not all those jobs are necessarily going to be green jobs. And we're seeing again a bit of a false dichotomy about whether or not jobs, employment, security is commensurate with environment. I think you're going to talk to us about careers that replenish Earth and in a way kind of myth busts that dichotomy. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Tanya. Hi, everybody. You know, it's one of those scary moments in life that you wonder, how in the world are we going to get through this? But the reality of the situation is not the reality of our lifetimes. And so I think we need to put much of the experiences of the last couple of months into perspective of the whole. So the technology that has been moving on, or the science that has been moving on, the kind of questions that we've been asking, much of them kind of, you know, are very tactical for that time. But, you know, often we don't stop to wonder why are we at this place, and what is it that we need to get through to this, the audience that we're working with. So it really is one of those moments, I think, that allows us to sort of pivot and recognize, is this the way that we want it to be? As we're at home, many of us are actually doing the jobs that would otherwise be outsourced to somebody else, or perhaps even decision making in the home environment, or, you know, being exposed to the home environment as well. And I wanted to delve into a little bit of information on that, and I will go into more information on the actual employment front, because, you know, if you've been furloughed, or perhaps you're without a job, or you've fallen in between the cracks of receiving any grants or support or loans, it's a tough time to recognize, what is it that I need to do so that I can adjust not only my business model of life, but my business model for my company, perhaps the skills that I have, how do I transfer that? And these are very big questions for anybody that is at home wondering, for how long will coronavirus or its return and the subsequent waves impact my life? So without further ado, I wanted to share a couple of notes that I've been exploring on this topic with my company Replenish Earth, and really delve into, just let me know, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Brilliant. Okay, great. You know, we are indigenous to Earth, and we're created from the same natural elements, where the cosmos, each and every one of us, and what's more is everything about our lives originate from nature, and every need can actually be met by this very planet. It kind of reminds me of a time when I was a kid, and my mom would come up to me if I had like a nettle sting, and she'd get like a dock plant and she'd rub it on, and she'd often sort of say, you know, everything that you need is nearby. Like, if the cause of the sting and the solution for the sting is within distance. And I think that we often forget that there is something really powerful of understanding that we are also part of nature, where bridging this environmental divide that I think we're experiencing today. You know, many of us are experiencing much more pains in society than others. It's disproportionate. Some people are experiencing loss of livelihood. Other people are experiencing loss of jobs. And so, you know, there's a number of factors that will play a part. And, you know, on a deeper level, if you were to look at Syria and about 6 million people that have subsequently migrated out of Syria, at the root cause of Syria was a drought. And that drought has led to a number of consequences politically. I'm sure Tanya can go into much more detail about them. But those kinds of consequences have led people to leaving the country. Where did they go? Big questions about that. And of course, over the next, I would say, maybe 100 years, this is based on NASA's very conservative predictions, we're looking at about 500 million to 1 billion people that will be leaving their home countries away from droughts and any kind of difficulties in their home environment. So you can imagine, what are these people going to be doing? Where are they going to be going? And how will the new destination receive them? Of course, we've seen the plight of the refugees today, where as they're traveling across the world, borders are closed, you know, doors are up, sorry, can't come in. So for how long will that last? And of course, with an increasing, you know, belt around the equator that's drying up, take, for example, Abu Dhabi with 50 degrees Celsius in the summer just now, imagine with you know, an increased heat island effect, with increased amounts of built environment that doesn't dissipate the warmth, with increasing amounts of air conditioning that is used only for the air that's hot to be released just outside of the buildings. It just keeps on going hotter and hotter. This kind of environment is really detrimental to our long-term sustainability. So, you know, during COVID-19, we've taken a pause. I call it grounded by Mother Nature. We're in the liminal space that I call the imaginal cells of humanity, like a caterpillar that goes into the chrysalis, kind of turns into goo, metamorphoses into you know, this gooey kind of liminal cell, this imaginal cell that holds both the form of the caterpillar as well as the butterfly, and then transforms it. You know, we're in this kind of weird silence mode where the world is still, and we're also in our own cocoons, our own homes. So really, our home environment has become the immersive experience, the liminal cells between what would otherwise be pre-COVID human to post-COVID human. And it's the time where we not only get to replenish ourselves, but we get to pivot what does and what doesn't work for us. So what is it that we'd like to take from, you know, the older systems and the older times, and what do we want to take from that system, unlearn it, scrap it completely, and take what we want and what we need forward. You know, our powerful earth has achieved in mere weeks what environmentalists have tried in governments and organizations for decades, you know, going back to the book The Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Often she'd go into much more detail about how there were consequences to using so many chemicals in the environment. And of course, these implications in and the lack of diversity, not only were what's happened. I actually learned that the philosophy of capitalism is simply capital accumulation, right? Humans have become hoarders of all kinds, intellectual hoarders, physical hoarders. I'm one of them. And this creates capital on so many fronts. One of those fronts, especially in cities or urban environments, is a landfill site. So yeah, all of that capital has been accumulated. It just so happens to be on top of that landfill site. But you know, when the need of something subsides, we don't have a way of putting it back into nature that is actually, you know, positive for the environment. So all of our products and services are designed, you know, with sustainability as an afterthought, as a way of not really syncing with the environment. And my work to design these sort of sustainable business models has taught me that although density in cities is great for services to be accessible, they require larger and larger environments to support them, like globalization, supply chains across the world. Products require further afield support with very, very complex systems and without that kind of local knowledge to support them. So my aha moment really came when I realized that that we need to go to the philosophy of something, because if you look at the kind of the pyramid diagram, you see the philosophy of capitalism then turns into the trade mechanism of how that philosophy is practiced, and then is converted in whatever we innovate and create into, whether it's, I'm talking about cities and buildings being products and services, but I'm also looking at, you know, glasses, tops, you know, laptop cases. It doesn't really matter. The point is that we've really got to look at the philosophical underpinning of what we're doing. So in your life, what's the philosophy that you're practicing? If it is of capital accumulation, there are consequences that we need to be aware of. I've been researching this aha moment in me was when I was looking at that philosophy. If we were to shift it so that it was more appropriate to what we need right now, what would that be? So unlike capitalism, which is, you know, to shift our lifestyles to live further into harmonizing with nature, I think Kalyan mentioned it earlier, we need to create ecosystems that understand their impact rather than the economies that create externalized waste. And we've made it our business at Replenish Earth to really protect the global commons by positively reinforcing sustainable innovation, by building design and also technological solutions for those interested in transitioning away from fossil fuels. Technology is pretty much anything that augments, right? My glasses are technology. So we kind of architect eco buildings and cities, especially in Kansara Hackney Limited, but we also invest in the sort of bottom-up innovation where we can sort of decentralize that tech. We work to, you know, not fulfill one SDG at the cost of the rest. We've worked with 120 companies with a shared net value of upwards of $450 billion. We've advised governments across the world on housing and sustainable development to really create that sort of indirect impact on you know, millions of people. We've had an exhibition in India, in Goa, where we've really created an immersive multi-sensory experience. And you know, it's a larger sort of question of how we can sort of retrocast the spoils and the nightmares. Often at university or schools, we're not, and even in our workplaces, we're not really taught how to plan for contingencies. We're not really taught how to, you know, forecast 50 years hence, and then retrocast to see what those steps are, to understand what our collective and individual moves should be. So really, the price, you know, of making that shift is rather large. But considering the amount of bailouts that the governments have been giving to many of the largest corporations, surely instead of reinforcing those kinds of companies, we need to be looking at innovation away from them, or innovation that sort of makes them obsolete and the impact that they have on the environment, which is negative, obsolete. So really, in my view, we've never accounted for the environment and the cost of externalities on society. So increasingly more popular uses of environmental accounting, like ecosystem services, will need to be understood in order for us to give back more than we're taking. So of course, we can offset our bad environmental behavior, but why not just start with businesses at the beginning with which are already aligned with the environment? Why not create businesses where sustainability is a forethought rather than an afterthought in some CSR department when something has gone awfully wrong? You know, we need businesses and designs for sustainable, cost-effective, and safe products and services, homes, you know, what, you name it, right? That protect people in case of health-related crises such as pandemics as well. So really just wanted to give you a little bit of a layout of what I've been doing, but also to share some questions that I've got, and hopefully you can sort of share in the chat what you're thinking about as well. And yes, we are expanding and we need your support. So to be part of the kind of identity or the butterfly from the liminal cells into formation, you can take a picture of this QR code. And also keep in contact with us, because, you know, as we're transitioning and we're all making this transition, it feels very much like this rite of passage where we're shifting and we've no idea whether we're going to really make it through. But really, this is the time that we make that decision too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tia. I think you're always such an inspirational speaker, and you've taken us on a huge journey in 12 or 15 minutes. You've started with the comprehensive context of we are from the universe, we are all indigenous to Earth, and if that's our reference point, then how can we move forward? You make some excellent points, too many to count. I know that you have to leave in about 15 minutes, so if people have questions for you, perhaps we can invite them to email us and get in touch with you, or organise for some connection.
Yeah, fantastic.
But some of those points you made are just brilliant. First of all, the idea of humans have become hoarders because of the societies we've built. And I think that kind of socialization we're sometimes completely unaware of. We talk about unconscious bias, but we sometimes don't understand our unconscious sense of principle or morality. So often we're working towards something that physically makes us sick, and we're not even aware why.
Yeah.
It's because we're working against ourselves and against nature towards a philosophy that is imposed from outside. The two things I really appreciate about what you were saying is, one, you talked about Abu Dhabi and just the belts, that it's already getting 50 degrees hotter. And one point I'd like to make is that often we think we're very clever and environmental if we're looking at adaptive technologies. But the problem with adaptation is that ultimately it is kind of human-centric. So I was also touched by your point that we look at one, we try to meet all sustainable development goals rather than sacrificing one for another. So if we look at adaptation, climate change, for example, or even adaptation in the COVID environment, adaptation only works if you have the resources to adapt. So we're actually creating gaps when we adapt. Whereas when we mitigate, we have a community mindset, because mitigation is about making sure that we're protecting the environment as a whole, or at least not allowing more devastation to happen. So even the way we've moved into COVID, I know lots of restaurants are open and give takeaway coffees, but they now refuse to use the keep cups or non-disposable cups, for example, which means that we're again sacrificing the waste element. Even all the testing that's required and it's necessary, all those tests are producing a waste, and we then haven't even thought through in a forethought way what we're going to do with all that waste generated. So I think this is the perfect segue to turn now to a speaker who is not at all human-centric. Rahul Khadaliya is someone who really appreciates the complete continuity, that we're all part of nature and that every single creature really deserves love and respect. Rahul is a vegan and lives as he speaks and does, and is also committed to the idea that we don't need to produce waste. So Rahul, you started on a project called The Second Life, where products are designed and created to promote the ideas of sustainable impact through the minimum use of energy, with eco-friendly materials and sustainable ideologies that you reuse and recycle. The other way you work is also to connect through culture, which is what really touches me. So in addition to eco-friendly materials, you use art and aesthetics for connection. Could you tell us a little bit more about The Second Life?
Thank you, Tia. This has been a great opportunity for me to talk about my work and what I've been doing for past around 10 years. And my journey started a little bit, I think I'm audible, I think. Okay, thank you. Okay, so my journey started with a small story. I'll keep it very short because it's a very long story if I have to observe each and every detail of it. But I think Tia knows about it because when we presented it, Replenish, I think it's about that. So my story of identifying need and want, like what Kalyan also spoke, that we live in the world about plenty, and then still we have poverty. So this was something which came to me in a lifetime example. I was sitting in a small town, a small market in the Bangalore market, and what I saw was a very old pack of jute on the side of a tea stall, which suddenly started moving. and I was curious to find out what is there inside. But I suddenly see that there is a lady dressed in a very dirty clothes comes out from the other side of the tea stall, and she lifts it up, and then I realized that there's a child, newborn child, and what she had was 2 cups of in her hand. One was filled with milk, and one was with water. Okay, and what she does is she feeds the child half of the milk, and then fills the other half with the water, and she repeats it thrice, so it becomes 2 cups of milk. That was a simple story that I realized that this is a simple need that people have. And the same day when I'm coming back to my area where I was living, I was at a restaurant, I was just having my coffee, and I see the same scenario of a mother and a child, and the table was full of chaat items like the basic snacks that we have in India. And by the time I finished my coffee, the mother and child, they leave the table, leaving half of the food item there. And the instant realization that what exactly is need and want is defined contextually, right? So that's something which is very interesting, and started my whole journey. And during the same time, I was researching my paper on uh, design management through sustainability. So that's something connected and kind of moved me towards this whole idea of exploring sustainability. And because I'm a designer, I'm more of a tangible person. And in 2011, I started my studio ABCD to design sustainable solutions. But without many opportunities there, I started my own brand, which Tia talked about, the Second Life. I'll take you to that screen immediately. So, okay, I think it's visible. Okay, I'll quickly talk about the design for the user. So the first product that we started and how the whole brand came into the picture, the Second Life, it started with a simple product that we kind of did. And it's not, if you have to come to this product, it's not a very heavy design oriented product. It's something which happened in a split second at a small NGO. So this is the product that we started with, and we ran almost for a year. So these are simple block printed traditional traditional block printing is usually done on fabrics. So we started doing this directly on a newspaper. So if you look at a life of a newspaper, it's just within the 15 minutes of the morning, it gets discarded. Whereas the production process and the printing and all the things that goes into it, it's very huge. So what we looked at here is the paper part of a newspaper and started reusing that. And also along with that, what we added is the livelihood opportunities for an NGO that was using existing blocks to print. So we didn't create any new blocks. Usually if you create a new block, you have to take out wood. So they already had around 4,000 set of blocks, and we started using those to create this item. So this kind of has become a very identical to our brand. It quickly tells you anybody, even a simple a small kid will easily identify this was a newspaper and this is not now. This is a gift wrapping paper. So this story has been very interesting for us. And now what we see lately, we have seen interesting stories of let me tell you why I title my presentation as designing intentions, because that's the idea behind the Second Life. We don't want just a material to be exist and be used as a product, but we want people to change our thinking using those products. So it's an unconscious thinking that we also inspire. And we have been hearing stories that somebody has gifted this something wrapped in this newspaper, and the same newspaper has come back to them using a new gift. So it's like back and forth that has taken. That's the most inspiring thing that has happened with this thing. Uh, Another products that we have after that, the same philosophy has been continuing, and we started designing a lot of products that categorize into 4 different segments: stationery, lighting, accessories, and all that. So this papers that you see are papers which are discarded after a printing process has been completed. So our production processes, like how we generate waste, not not of, not only after consuming individual consumption, but also during the production process. There's a huge amount of waste that comes out of it. So we kind of taken that into as a raw material and started working on it. So what we see here, what we do is we don't use any machine energy to create the shapes or anything. We try and do everything by hand. So it's we try what I've redefined is human energy as a replacement energy to the machine energy. So anyways, we exist and we are going to produce CO2. Why don't we use that energy, human energy, to produce items. And we already have, if you look at India, we already have so much population, and already after COVID-19, what we have seen is a huge increase in unemployment. So if we can generate employment using this, that's the idea behind this. And this is a set of the lighting that we have. This on the right hand side, the gear parts are made out of old vinyl records. So it's also like components which are modular. We don't. The idea behind this is to use as much as possible before recycling. So that's the idea that we have implemented in our products. This is a quick thing, because this is something which I have very important for our brand, is to teach people that there is a difference, huge difference between upcycling and recycling. Even in when we go to the market, people say that our products are recycled products. I'll immediately correct that these are not recycled products, these are upcycled products, because there is a huge difference. It's the same difference between a recycled material and a fresh raw material. This was an interesting thing that happened with us. We started using kitchen waste to create dyes for the paper. And why kitchen waste is to kind of, if we see restaurants, they produce a lot of kitchen waste. Like simple that September on the backside, which you see, that comes out of onion peels. Biryani shop next to my house had around 1 kg or 2 kg of onion peels every day. So that's something which was an interesting thing, that exploration happened. And what we're trying to do is what we saw the first newspapers, block printed newspaper, they are using water-based pigment inks. What we're trying to do is design our own inks so that we can even minimize our impact on what is happening in our products. Next is I'm going to talk about design for inclusivity within our processes. A couple of years back, this interesting thing happened, that we met with an NGO that was working in the field of mentally disabled people, and we started observing that what kind of impact we can create here. So this is a simple product, but the story behind the production of the product is very interesting. So this one lamp is 1 day's activity for one person, a person with a Down syndrome, and that activity itself is a therapy for them. So that's the most interesting part. It may be a simple product which is made out of the same newspaper waste that we create in our day-to-day production. It is given to the NGO, and the whole day one person sits and then keeps sticking the strips on a form, and then creates this at the end of the day. So this involving the producers as the consumers of the production process was a very interesting exploration for us. And so that's where the story of inclusivity started, and we started exploring furthermore. And till this state, we were exploring retail products, and then we wanted to also move on to mass produce, not even mass produce, I'll say to consume a larger amount of waste. We want to create raw materials out of upcycling processes. So that's when the next process started, and we kind of looked at this as a part of the inclusivity and also scalability and human energy. So this is the waste that comes out of printing presses when they start printing. It's almost like sometimes it's 2% and it goes up to 8%. So this is a raw material which is wasted even without going to the consumer cycle. So that's something which is very interesting, that we saw that there is a possibility we can create here. Okay, I'll very quickly wrap it up. Okay, so this and then we moved on to creating a product out of this. We started very quickly with weaving by hand, but it didn't work out. So we kind of moved on to creating a machine, a hand loom that kind of weaves this paper into a raw material, which can be used for a lot of different things. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this is the outcome of that paper. So this can be used for architectural purposes and all that. And I'll quickly take you to the last slide where we have explored. Just a second, Tanya, I'm just looking at the last one. Okay, so this is the impact that we are trying to create, design for reusability, a lot of involving different ideas into this process. Then how can we create impact at every stage of the process? I think I won't take much of your time. I think that's about it. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you very, very much, Rahul. And sorry to rush you. We're now on 3 o'clock, so some of the ideas are so impressive that I think we could have done a day of a webinar for this. But I really thank you for the starting point as well. I think the takeaway in each point is the aha moment. So even describing the fact that you're sitting there having a coffee and seeing someone eating chaat and seeing the waste that is generated is a really interesting starting point. A lot of people do upcycling, but the idea of connecting that to art and aesthetic and culture, and having that cultural connection through your block printing, I think is extraordinary. And then, of course, using kitchen waste. I want to use our finale with the extraordinary Professor Veena Sahajwalla. Veena has also been exploring the concept of waste and what we could do, and has taken this to the next scale. And like everyone that has spoken here today, she's got her own take on how you can see the world around you, improve it, but also have these other positive effects on the environment. So I briefly described the microfactory, but really Veena Sahajwalla has revolutionized recycling science to the point that she was honored with a Padma Shri award from the President of India. She has taken on green manufacturing with gusto, and has even agreed to answer to the phrase Queen of Garbage with confidence and pride. Veena, could you tell us a little bit more about green manufacturing, your microfactory, and the impacts of that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tanya. And I've got to say, wow, I've been blown away with all the speakers. I mean, that's a fabulous collection of very inspiring people. I don't know how anyone can beat that. Of course, with your leadership and your personal passions, as Tanya said earlier, how we met was that connectivity through those pair of Gandhi glasses. And maybe I can use that as an example, Tanya, to sort of, try and draw the picture of microfactories and what we're doing. That, of course, I don't need to explain to your wonderful audience and everybody why this is so important. I think your speakers have explained it beautifully, that ultimately, if we are going to look at creating value, and of course, all the beautiful ideas that have been shown, where microfactories really are talking about production. And I think the concepts have come through around decentralization and trying to do things locally as much as possible. So, when we think about circular economy, people tend to think that your kind of circular economy has to be all about conversion of the product into exactly the same thing. But of course, as we've been hearing this afternoon, that really products can be brought back to life over and over again in different forms. And I think that just means that effectively the basic materials and the molecules that are there inherent in all our materials, whether it happens to be the newspaper that Rahul was talking about, or indeed in our particular case, where we're using waste plastics. But the reason why we know it's important, we recognize that whole sort of traditional approach of linear economy is not good for our planet, full stop. We simply cannot live assuming that our resources are going to last forever. So if we think about at the very basic level, it's about just keeping our materials in our economy that allow us to have the basics in life. I do agree with the point that excess, of course, and people sort of over-consuming and all of those things that, of course, I'm sure with the SDGs, everybody knows the one number 12 that talks about responsible consumption and production. But yes, in a holistic sense, when we talk about microfactories, it's not just about taking our waste materials and converting them into a value-added product that is then going to continue its life in a new form each time. But it's also about thinking about energy. It's about thinking about employment. It's about all of these issues that have beautifully come up in the panel earlier. So if you are looking at a location where there might be a pile of waste, very difficult to have employment, how do you actually create a small enough scale production? And interestingly, it goes right back to a lot of things that, of course, we've seen in India, the Make in India campaign, and Swachh Bharat, and all of these beautiful things that really come together so nicely, because I think it's about then saying that if we're talking about making products that society needs, and back to that pair of glasses, that simple sort of Gandhi glasses, how do you actually make sure that, people can actually produce, manufacture those? And we've now extended that philosophy out into so many different things that everybody needs. So you think about, how you could potentially use 3D printing, using waste plastics and converting them into filaments and ultimately creating products is about, ultimately at the core of it lies equity, right? Because if you need a pair of glasses, you need a pair, or you need prosthetics, or you need something fitted, like let's talk about the human body, you shouldn't have to just be somebody who's rich enough to be able to afford it. So I think to me, that's that basic equity question in there. So what microfactories are really all about is enabling production to happen at a small enough scale, but looking at how technology, and I think again, decentralization of technologies came up, which is at the heart of what microfactories do. They are affordable technologies. You can take waste plastics, as one of our technologies does, convert them into plastic filaments, make products, looking at things like pair of glasses, looking at prosthetics, looking at a lot of things that you can actually do at a small scale niche level. But the core philosophy here is that it's kind of nicely tying together the various sort of points we've heard this today in the panel discussion, that how do you enable local production, and even to the point where if we can obviously talk about food, we can talk about the basics we need, then why not expand that philosophy and say, if regional areas that actually start to manufacture products, whether it is what we need as human beings on our bodies, whether it is about what we need to create a beautiful home, but yet if it is made out of recycled materials, it's not seen as in any way, as I think has been talked about before, of poorer quality. So part of bringing in the science and engineering into what we do in our microfactories is to be able to demonstrate that things made out of recycled content actually can have comparable competitive properties to any other material that's being manufactured. So the difference lies here. We've had to, of course, shift the way we do our manufacturing and production. So you can actually produce quality high performance products. So if you did want to put tiles and flooring and roofing in a home, you can imagine that being made totally out of waste materials like glass, waste wood, waste plastics, and of course waste textiles. So I think to me, the ability to even pick up on something as basic as waste textiles, and we all know that the world is completely overwhelmed with how much waste textiles and the problems associated with it. And of course, I want to pick up on that particular example because, we talk about, microplastics, and then people sort of go, microplastics. Okay, that's coming out of the 10 rivers in different parts of the world, and that's where it ends up. But if you imagine a project that allowed us to collect these types of microplastics, and then you start to bring them on shore, the question is not just about cleaning up the Ganges or other rivers. It's about really then saying, once you do bring these resources to the ground, can you actually then make something value added with it? So part of our sort of thinking in terms of what microfactories are, they're decentralized production, but really of high quality products. So in this particular case, for building applications. That then means that you have empowered that local community that might be inundated with all the waste that lands up in their area to actually do something positive with it. But also it means that you could be in a regional area and you could actually manufacture products that, in a way, it's going back to part of that old-fashioned way of saying, look, if I'm really good at making products for our built environment, that's fabulous. You know what, the town next door is really good in doing textile production, furniture production, making the lights, all the beautiful things that we need in our homes. But how do you then enable that production capacity to be built? So it's not about saying every town needs to have all microfactories that can make everything you need and be completely self-sustaining, but rather saying if you decided that in a distance of a few hundred kilometers, people start to look at resilience in a way that allows us to, source our products locally. So it's the same thinking around produce, right? When people talk about, and I think that was one of the earlier comments that Kalyan made about, growing local produce. And so if we are then saying, if we could extend that philosophy out to, manufacturing all those products that you need in a local environment, why that matters so much? Because you can imagine if you are designing homes where you are doing something for a colder part of, the country, as opposed to something that you are producing products for hotter parts of the country, northern versus southern parts of India, or Australia versus Europe. You would actually have different materials. You would build them in a way where science and engineering allows you to understand what the climatic conditions are. So if you want to make something for different climates, you want to make something that's going to be resilient to termite and pest attacks, you would actually design your products and the materials that go into making it quite different. So I thought, one example, interestingly, out of Dubbo, a regional town here in New South Wales, was when this guy was actually a farmer, using a lot of beautiful wood on his farm and producing oils and scents out of that. I had a lot of leftover waste wood. And of course, our journey with him started when he said, well, here's a pile of waste wood. What can I do with it? And I said, well, are there any special features about this? And he said, oh, one of the nice things about our wood is that, termites don't like to eat that wood. And I said, well, that's fantastic, because it means that it could actually be quite a useful feedstock for production where people might have pest attacks, termites attacks. So I guess the point about that story is that for that particular farmer, the pile of waste wood coming out of that region was just the waste wood. But when you convert that into a microfactory setting that allows production of beautiful tiles, so this sort of, holds some of these beautiful tiles up there. These are all made out of literally waste wood coming out of waste furniture to, farm-based waste and so on, because even in a farm, you've got lots of inedible parts of food. So we've used things like macadamia shells to all kinds of products. But the difference here now is that you can integrate materials in our society, make these hybrid products, do it locally. So you're not dependent on a large corporate located somewhere far away, making and manufacturing things on a mass scale. So I think it comes right back to that whole philosophy of what we mean by circular economy, what we mean by resilience. And of course, more so than ever before, what COVID has shown us is really with PPE, the personal protective equipment, as we saw many hospitals facing shortages. If you could imagine, which is exactly what we ended up doing, using a lot of our 3D printing out of waste plastic filaments and using that to manufacture some of the equipment that obviously were required at that point in time. So I think it's just kind of talking about, people have used the words, I think Tia used the word pivoting into different, requirements, and as the needs change, and how resilient are we in responding to the fact that, yes, we're still in the middle of this crisis, can we actually localize and mobilize production capacity so that we can use materials that we have in our economy, in this case, waste plastics, to actually channel it towards production of PPE. So I sort of use those examples because it allows us to actually then think, if a crisis hits us, we're not just dependent on a global supply chain and we're waiting for some imported product to come, as we've seen so many parts of the world were in that situation, but rather quickly mobilizing that. So in our own microfactories at UNSW, we were able to produce prototypes literally within the week, have that out in the hands of end users, so medical professionals were testing it. So I guess to us, it's again back to the story, I think, Tanya, with the Gandhi glasses, I think was something very similar, where you said we had about a couple of weeks to produce those prototypes, right? And indeed, some of the Gandhi glasses that were gifted that you were talking about. So I guess to me, it's all an indication that, the needs are going to change, societal needs, whether we're in a crisis or whether it's about what local resources are available, whether it happens to be fabric or used paper. We need to be able to understand how we can actually use that so that there's equity in our society. So to me, I always actually get inspired by people who ask us to do certain things, because when someone saw our glasses and they said, oh, well, actually, can you try printing this prosthetic arm for us out of that waste plastic? So we went and we did that, right? So I think to me, it's also about all of us inspiring each other. So, if we live in that collaborative, shared way of, asking for help, and at the same time sharing what we have to offer, I think it can be a win-win outcome for our communities. It doesn't matter whether you're in India, in Australia, wherever you are in the world, we all have to rely upon local communities, and whether that means, the town next door has a small microfactory that can make a certain product that you need, is an important thing for us to, when we start to think about self-resilience. And it's no different to food, it's no different to stuff we need at our homes. And I think the more we start to, as the saying goes, yes, you can think globally, but you have to act locally, you know, and I think more importantly, in the time of crisis that we've seen in COVID, that became even more important, that, you know, our local medical professionals working very hard to keep people safe, but then they needed PPE, they needed that support from manufacturers to give them that. And I think if we can't, you know, come to their aid, how can they help us? So I just wanted to use that as an example because that's something that we can all relate to. So it goes right back to that point about local production and manufacturing of really what I would call our essential products, essential services that fall into that category. So I want to just leave it at that, Tanya, and sort of really say thank you again for this incredible experience to participate in this fabulous panel, and everyone's been an awesome, inspiring speakers today. So thank you. I feel very humbled. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Veena. And that's an extraordinary amount of information you've just given us as well about the research that you're doing, but also the impact. And I think it comes down to what every speaker on the panel has been saying, and you as well, Veena, but very poignantly said by Tia, is that we don't have to choose one sustainable development goal at the cost of another. So the fact that your micro factories, first of all, they recycle plastic waste, but from electronic waste, so we don't have to bury or burn that. So you recycle that. Then, as you say, you are fixing the problem of global supply chains by offering a local solution. Not only that, but by locating micro factories within a city, you're cutting down on transport costs, which again then cuts down on emissions and transport pollution. And then finally, you're actually empowering local employment. So in the same way that Kalyan spoke about resilience and the rural setting for economy and ecosystems, you're creating the same in an urban environment. Just by recycling, you're then impacting each of the other SDGs so positively as well. So honestly, I absolutely am impressed and inspired by everyone on the panel today. And I'm delighted that we can all come together and really think about how to inspire one another, as Veena just said, thinking about World Environment Day tomorrow. I just wanted to check with the panelists. We are a few minutes over time. We do have a few questions. Would the panelists be okay with having, say, 1 or 2 questions before we go? 5 more minutes more? That's okay?
Yeah.
Thank you all. Yeah. So yeah, if you have to go, please do. But for those who can answer, I will just read out some questions now. So I'm delighted to say we've got questions from all over the world, from France, from New York, and from Uzbekistan. I might start with one to Tia, because I think, Tia, you need to go soon. You spoke about inserting sustainability into capitalist systems and thinking about how to enable a coexistence with human civilization, but understanding it in the context of the parameters of capitalism. Is there a way in which we can describe a post-capitalist model, and is that part of your work?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this transition period is giving us sight on something we've never really looked at in as much detail, because it's so obvious to us in this more, possibly this more sort of introverted state that we're in. This gives us the opportunity not only to identify with what we've got at home, in what way do we have the things that have, you know, that have arrived in our home environment, in our work environment, but where is it that we're actually reinforcing certain behaviors that are completely misaligned with the future? And I think one way that we can do that is educating ourselves more about the science of the environment, what's happening with climate crises, and what we can do personally. But also, every time we spend a penny, a pound, a rupee, a dollar, we're putting it towards something in the system. So really our choice exists with what we spend our money on, and we're creating that system by investing in that system. You may not think that you're investing in the system, but every time you buy something, you have encouraged that company to make another product, or you have encouraged the school to teach another course. So that kind of choice, even though it seems as if you can't make the biggest impact on, you know, society, that one little choice that you have extends across thousands, if not millions of people who make the same choice every day. And so that gives you a lot of power to decide where you're going to put your money. So if you're thinking in terms of that kind of shifting away from this capitalistic model, it kind of reinforces competition, right? Because in order for you to scale in a capitalistic model, you have to compete. Whereas if you want to scale in, an environment of cooperation or replenishing the planet, then you need to build community to scale. And so there's a very big difference between competition to kill, right, to scale, one wins, the other loses, to community, which is where all of us survive in a way that is cooperative. So I think that sort of cooperative community model is really where we're going. We're coming to an end of this desire for dictator, populist mentalities of control to places where we don't accept that anymore. We're seeing it in America, we're seeing it across the world.
Thank you very much. No, I couldn't agree more with you, and particularly the concept that your dollar is a vote. I think people forget that you're actually voting and you're empowering every time you buy something. So as a small thing, I remember when I was in Moscow, there's a huge McDonald's just opposite the Kremlin, which I find, juxtaposition style hilarious in some ways, to have this big, symbol of capitalism across from the Kremlin. But people said, I wish it would shut down. And I said, well, it's simple, stop going. You don't need to always petition the government to force them to shut something down. And not everything requires force. It can simply be to do or to not do. And to not do can be a powerful choice as well. So I completely agree. Thank you for that. Turning to some other questions, we have Vlad from New York. He's asking, could you please outline the key challenges to sustainable development? I might throw that question to Kalyan, since he's doing so much grassroots stuff. Kalyan, are you happy to answer that? If Kalyan is on the call. Perhaps his microphone isn't working. Is anyone else on the panel interested to answer the question, what are the key challenges to sustainable development? Sebastian, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a really complex question. I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals give an indication what are the key aspects at the moment. I mean, it's really about health. What we see at the moment, we have a health crisis, but we also have a crisis in terms of transitions, in terms of mobility, of energy transition. So I think there are a couple of food production. I think there are so many, and they're also interconnected, and we have to find connecting points and intersectoral ways how we can deal with it. But yeah, there are many. It's probably hard to say which are the biggest or most important ones. Probably someone wants to jump in, but yeah, there are many.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say, one of the things that if we're sort of looking post all of this sort of time and where everybody is looking for recovery, I think to me, yes, we've talked about how do you provide for the basics. There's got to be a little bit of that getting away from, if we're going to look at not getting overly excessive in the way we consume things, I think perhaps this whole sort of resetting that's happening right now with regards to the situation we're in, I think really questioning our values in terms of, even the whole discussion today, where before people would have seen sustainability, environment, and all of these things as a nice little extra thing on the side. Whereas I think now if more and more businesses to look at, jobs and really the caring type of economy, if you want to sort of put it that way, is going to be important, that we don't lose sight of ultimately we still need to make things. And I think that focus on manufacturing, which is why, sort of referring to the Make in India campaign, I mean, you still have to be able to provide for the basic necessities that human beings need. How do you do it in a way that now takes environment into consideration and not sort of, oh, let's clean up afterwards? So, the fact that all these plastics are there in our rivers and we're now going, oh gosh, we better clean up because, some of well, I mean, the reality is why did it end up in there in the first place, right? So, but also the notion that do we really need that many plastic bottles with our packaging? So, you know, I mean, fundamentally, you then start to ask those questions. So I would probably say that it's almost resetting the dial, but even at a personal level, I think to your point, Tanya, about making the choices as to what we choose to do and how we spend our money. So businesses get the message as to what we want as human beings and what we don't want.
I agree, but I'm going to try and interject because everything you say is fantastic, but there's another question that will really allow you to specifically engage because you're the perfect one for it, Veena. Going on to from your plastics point, someone has just asked that in the current environment, there's a lot of single-use plastic being produced that is considered necessary for health reasons. So PPE, you know, the rubber gloves, plastics and medical equipment, which would also have a hygiene angle. But is there anything constructive we could do with that kind of waste?
Yeah, look, absolutely, which is why I guess, I mean, to me, the connectivity that we've built with hospitals, you know, the point I was making actually started out even before COVID. So I do appreciate that in COVID times, you know, people are even more familiar, but prior to COVID, it was the request that came from doctors who were themselves feeling like something had to happen because the fact that everything was, yes, one, it is disposable as some of the products need to be, but why does it need to go into an incinerator to be burnt? And, you know, why can't we look at manufacturing that allows us to safely deal with the bacterial and the infectious materials or things that have come into contact with patients? So yes, use the thermal transformation to be able to deal with the bugs, but use that energy that you would have normally taken to incinerate something and burn it away just because you see it as a contaminated waste. Use that energy to actually manufacture something else out of it. So it's again about recognizing that manufacturing of products that depends upon feedstock of materials doesn't always have to come from virgin resources. And the fact that we could even use something as challenging as a contaminated resource, but you design your manufacturing process so that it enables you to use, you know, the right processing parameters so you can see that resource, PPE, you know, plastics, we all know how much that is, the gloves and so on, but to use that in a manufacturing sense. So a lot of our manufacturing products that we do, we actually will apply the right kind of thermal dial to be able to deal with some of these questions. So if we want to be able to kill bugs, because that's what we have to do, then the right temperature setting, we want to be able to make products at a certain temperature. So we use a lot of metallics coming out of our packaging and indeed other industries to recover those metallics where it might have been ordinarily seen as, oh gosh, it's too hard to recover anything out of. So yeah, no, we are developing new technologies, and that's where that diverse range of micro factories that we've developed allows us to focus in on sometimes problematic waste and deal with it, but deal with it where there's a positive outcome. And that's exactly what we have to do.
That's wonderful. And as always, you take the question and you make it even bigger and more applied by saying, well, it's not just the plastic itself, but what can we do with the energy that burns the plastic? So thinking about the whole cycle. I think we've lost Tia. I think she's had to go. So unfortunately, Kalyan, are you there? Can I ask you a question? Okay, so then I'll throw it open to the rest of the panel. It's a very tricky one. It comes from Kudrat in Afghanistan, and he's asking, what is the, let me get this exactly. What is the ultimate purpose of human beings in this world? So it's a huge question, but I think what he's trying to ask is, in terms of guiding a new generation and accomplishing an own mission in life, how is it that the human mission is doing things in a better way and by the new generation than the predecessors have? So I guess, how do we empower the future generation with a sense of purpose and their place in the world? Did anyone want to try this question? It's a huge philosophical one, but I think very purposeful for today's discussion as well. So empowering the future
can I
generation.
take that,
Yeah.
Tanya?
Please. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Oh, you're still here. Great. Please.
Yeah, I mean, my connection, I don't know how long it lasts, but I'll try this question.
No, I wanted to put this to you, Kalyan. Perfect.
So, I mean, whatever I'm about to share about the purpose of life is not my own realization or anything, but I had the privilege of spending a lot of time with the tribals. And one of the healers, tribal healers, he gave me this perspective on this complicated subject. And what he told me is each of the species in nature is designed to live, survive, and in ways that contribute to the continuation of all life around them. And that simply is the purpose of life. Each of us need to figure out a way to contribute to the perpetuation of life around us. And all we need to keep thinking about is what's our contribution.
Perfect and well said. Thank you so much, Kalyan. And I think, I mean, this is the reason why I wanted to bring you all here today. Each one of you is inspiring, and each one of you is very impressive and humble in the sense that you also shared your aha moments. And I think that's inspiring because it makes us realize we don't have to be born with knowledge or inspiration. You can actually be inspired from the problems you might see around you and just start thinking positively, how can I come up with a solution? How can I empower myself and then those around me? So all of you have been exceptional panelists today. I thank you very, very much. I also thank our audience. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks.